But did you hear the one about the Romanian president who was arrested in traffic this afternoon and despite having to walk on crutches due to an injured knee, was rammed up against a wall and searched? And of course there was a swoop on the house of his bodyguard and his own house. And guess what? In the house of the bodyguard they discovered $10 million and a flight ticket to Moscow. And in Georgescu's house, they found more significant number of banknotes, heavy automatic weapons, and, you guessed it, a Russian passport. It's the old Russian passport and flight tickets to Moscow maneuver. And these jokers call themselves a fortress of democracy. Who was that Egypt? I've forgotten his name already, who said we were the garden and everyone else was trying to encroach upon us. Democracy, shamocracy. That's what the European Union has become. Although nobody in the European Union actually voted for her or even knows who she is. Maria, I think, Kallas, from Latvia or Estonia or Lithuania, who cares which, or all. She's the foreign minister of the European Union. She's just flown all the way to Washington to be told the man she was about to meet, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, is too busy to meet her. This after the Polish president was kept waiting 1 hour and 45 minutes for a 10-minute meeting with President Donald Trump. So when Donald Trump says, as he did today in the Oval Office, that the EU was set up to screw the United States and makes it clear with 25% tariffs that he thoroughly disapproves of the gang based in Brussels, you better believe that he means it. It's going to be a very interesting fly-on-the-wall meeting with Keir Starmer tomorrow, or on Friday, I'm not sure which, but Thursday or Friday. I'm actually on Piers Morgan's show tomorrow evening, talking with Piers about that. He's a massive fan of Keir Starmer. I, on the other hand, am less enamored. But when President Trump said today, again in the Oval Office, that Ukraine will never join NATO, and that's the issue over which all the trouble stemmed, he's surely right. And it's going to be interesting, therefore, how the traditional alliance, the special relationship between Britain and the United States survives this weekend. Not only did we gratuitously insult the American people by sending Jeffrey Epstein's best buddy, Lord as he's known, Peter Mandelson, as our man in Washington, but we have promised Zelensky, who's coming to London on Friday, promised Zelensky, not said that we would, but promised Zelensky that Ukraine will join NATO. Well, you can't have it both ways. You either promise they will, or the leader of NATO, Donald Trump, is to be taken at his word, and Ukraine will never join NATO, unless they have another NATO in mind. Herr Merz, the new putative Chancellor of the German Republic, whose grandfather turns out to be, guess what, a Nazi officer. Never ask a woman her age, a man his salary, or a German what his grandfather did in the war. Well, we know what Metz's grandfather did. He was one of Hitler's officer class. And he has an idea. A German-led NATO. A German-led European Union. Hitler had a similar idea, and he very nearly pulled it off, if not for the resistance of the United Kingdom in 1940 and 41, if not for the entry of the USSR into the war, and very belatedly, if not for the entry of the United States into the war, we'd already have a German-led European Union and a German-led NATO. And I'd be speaking to you in German, except I'd probably be in a concentration camp. The only thing that Mrs. Thatcher ever agreed with me about, or told me that she agreed with me about, was my contention that Germany should not be allowed to reunite. It had invaded France in 1870. It had begun the First World War in 1914. It had invaded and conquered most of Europe in 1939 and 1940. It could not be trusted not to do the same again. And Mrs. Thatcher came up to me in the corridor later, after I had said so in the House of Commons, and in her voice-coached voice said, "I rather agreed with that." Well, they are on a roll. Of course, they've only able to form a grand coalition between the so-called Labour Party, the SPD, in Germany, and the so-called Conservative Party, the CDU, because my friend Sarah Wagenknecht didn't get elected. She didn't get elected by a mere whisker, by 0.2%. But it turns out that a very large number of people who intended to vote for her, Germans abroad who couldn't stand living under Baerbock and Schulz, didn't get their ballot papers. Legal action will be forthcoming. If Sarah had been elected, then the CDU-SPD coalition could not have been formed. They would have been one vote short of a majority. Just the other week, it was a Monday night, I think, maybe last Monday or the Monday before, my whole house was wakened. The horses were frightened, well, the cats, I should say, when a very, very large United States strategic bomber flew directly overhead my house. It was, I'm sure, a B-52. B-52s were gathering in England a couple of weeks ago, and now they are in the Middle East. In the United States' biggest military base in the Middle East, in Qatar. In Qatar, they have the mother of all US military bases, which makes you wonder how Al Jazeera is still able to function. Perhaps it's a controlled opposition, who knows? But the war hawks are getting ready to fly out of Qatar. A United States and Israeli strike, attack, military attack, unprovoked military attack, full-scale military attack is expected at any moment. To which the Iranians will undoubtedly respond. Their true Promise 3 is, of course, still extant. And they announced today that Israel should know that Israel's nuclear weapons facility in Dimona is well within the range of their top missiles. So it looks like we're not out of the woods. Donald Trump may very well be committed to ending the war in Ukraine, but he sure seems set on starting a new war in the Middle East. The IAEA, right on cue, has delivered the report that Iran has substantially upped the amount, the volume of highly enriched uranium in its possession. I've said before, I'll say it again, even at the risk of penalty, that Iran is being extremely stupid in not building a nuclear bomb. After all, two nuclear-armed adversaries, the United States and Israel, are at its throat and about to bang on its door. So if it's true that Iran can build a nuclear weapon in 3 to 5 days from their stocks of highly enriched uranium, they would be very well advised to get started right away. It may be too late. The B-52s may be in the air. But however you dice it, it's going to be a very rocky week or so in the Middle East and in West Asia. Now, East Asia, West Asia, East Asia, I should have said. But the big story of the week for many, certainly for our editor, was the cockamamie video put out by Donald Trump. Now, I am an advocate of the following rubric. Don't listen to what Donald Trump says. Pay attention to what Donald Trump did. It's absolutely true that the video he produced is absolutely horrific, though it's only a video. It's only on TikTok. But it is a highly offensive one. It is a genocidal one because it presupposes the end of the existence of the ancient Palestinian people on their homeland. It shows Trump and Musk and others, tight speedos and all, laying back and drinking their pina coladas, or in Trump's case, his can of Coke. It shows a Trump Gaza hotel, hence the title of this week's show. It shows people carousing in a very far from Middle Eastern way. It shows women of dubious reputation cavorting on the graveyards of potentially 160,000 people or more in the Gaza Strip. Now, to build a Trump Tower hotel on the skulls and the bones of the people whose land it is definitely in very poor taste. But here's the rub. It will never happen. It cannot happen. First of all, the land legally belongs to the Palestinian people. That is a matter of international legal fact. Any company or country which was found to be making permanent alterations to the demography or the topography or the architecture of illegally occupied land would be committing a serious criminal offense. You're not allowed to build things on other people's land that you have seized in war. You're not allowed to knock down things that people who have been disinherited from their property have spent centuries, millennia in building. Now, you may say that the law is an ass, and so far it has indeed proved to be an ass. You may say that the United States is the law. That seems to be Trump's prevailing narrative. But it isn't, you see. And any company, any foreign company at least, which was held to be participating in this completely illegal and immoral act would be subject to its own domestic law in its own country and would be open to legal action to stop it. But more importantly, the 2 million Palestinians who live there have no intention of going anywhere. And it would be the least safe hotel to stay in ever known, ever since hotels began to be built. It would be subject to attack by the Palestinian resistance while it was being built, after it had been built, while it was accepting five-star customers. It would have to be pretty bomb-proof. It would have to be sure there were no tunnels underneath it, out of which might pop a resistance fighter and take a pot shot at the customers on their sun loungers. And thirdly, the Palestinians have no intention of going anywhere, and nobody has any intention of taking them, even if they change their mind. Jordan cannot take the Palestinian refugees from the West Bank. If it does, it will be the end of the Hashemite monarchy. Egypt cannot afford to take the Palestinian people from Gaza, for that would merely be transferring the struggle, now long-lived, between the Palestinian resistance and the Israeli occupier from Gaza to Egypt. And I promise you, Egypt is not prepared to do that. In fact, there's every possibility that the Egyptian army massing in the Sinai desert, NB Donald Trump, Sinai is not the plural of Sinus, it is the name of the desert just through the gate at Rafah. The Sinai is now the site of very considerable Egyptian troop movements and fortifications being built in preparation for a possible conflict with Israel. The dictator of Egypt, General Sisi, as I insist to still call him, has made it clear that the Camp David Accord, which has international treaty status, would be broken by any such Israeli move and would be null and void. And then a state of war would exist between Jordan and Egypt and the Israeli entity. So all of these are the reasons why this video will remain a pipe dream. I didn't even watch it all because I know that Donald Trump likes to run off at the mouth, and as long as he's running off at the mouth, I'm okay with that. I'm more interested in what Donald Trump is actually doing. So let's turn to that in relation to Ukraine. The Russian and American leaders are meeting again, this time in Istanbul, to finalize their preparations for the full resumption of diplomatic relations between them. That is quite a significant step. In fact, you'd think it was axiomatic that the two most powerful military powers in the entire world would never have stopped talking. But throughout the 4 years of Joe Biden's presidency, and because of Russiagate for a couple of years at least before that, the United States and Russia were hardly communicating at all. Megaphone diplomacy, threats, the moving of military assets, and finally, the effective NATO invasion of Russia's closest neighbor in the Ukraine. Well, that's all going into reverse now. Russia is about to sell millions of tons of aluminium to the United States. Whatever happened to these sanctions they kept telling us about? Millions of tons of aluminium to bring down and stabilize the price of that indispensable commodity, a raw material in which Russia is exceedingly wealthy. The Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, has said that sanctions on Russia will have to be lifted. And again, you would have thought that that is axiomatic, except the British and European Union governments have just imposed yet another round of sanctions. Did you know that the European Union gave Russia more money for oil and gas in the last 12 months than they gave to Zelensky and Ukraine? If I was Zelensky, I'd be rather miffed about that. The European Union is actually funding the Russian war effort while at the same time funding the resistance to the Russian war effort. And they tell you that these people are clever that run the European Union. Me, I left school at 16 and went to work in a factory on the shop floor. I predicted in the first week of these sanctions that they would turn into the biggest boomerang in history. And is there anyone out there who seriously doubts the correctness of what I said? Does anyone out there think that the next round of European Union sanctions against Russia are going to be any more effective than the previous 6 rounds of EU sanctions? Mind you, they have banned the export of consoles for computer games for the Russian public. I'm not sure the Federation will even be able to survive it. It's all coming up here because this is the mother of all talk shows. Stay tuned.